What if the words you never had the courage to say held the key to unlocking your heart? In The Letter I Never Sent, follow a journey of love, regret, and second chances as you discover how the unspoken can change everything. Will you find the strength to rewrite your story? The soft glow of the evening sun filtered through the sheer curtains, casting golden streaks across the worn wooden desk. A gentle breeze slipped in through the slightly open window, rustling the stack of papers that sat untouched in the corner. On the desk, a single sheet of paper lay beneath a pen, the ink slightly smudged, as if the words had been written hastily and then abandoned. The protagonist, Emma, sat by the window, her eyes distant as she stared at the letter she had started so many months ago. The words she'd penned had seemed so sure, so urgent at the time, yet now they felt hollow, incomplete, like something she had never quite meant to write. Her fingers traced the edge of the paper, remembering the emotions that had driven her to pour her heart out on that page. But she never sent it. The letter began simply, "Dear Lucas, I don't even know how to start this." She remembered the night she had written those words, the heavy weight of her unsaid feelings pressing down on her chest, begging to be released. But even as the pen moved across the page, doubt had crept in, slowing her hand until it stopped altogether. Emma's eyes moved to the unfinished line at the bottom. "I've loved you for longer than I can remember." She hadn't been able to finish it. Even now, the sentence hung there, incomplete, leaving a gap in the story of her life that she never found the courage to close. Why didn't she send it? The answer was complicated. Fear, perhaps fear of rejection, fear that the friendship she treasured so deeply with Lucas would shatter the moment he read those words. Or maybe it was pride, a defense mechanism she had always wielded to protect herself from the vulnerability that love demanded. Whatever the reason, the letter had remained tucked away in the drawer of her desk, hidden from the world, a secret that only she held. Emma sighed, the sound barely audible in the quiet room. She stood up slowly, her gaze drifting out of the window, where the world continued to move, unaware of the weight she carried in her heart. Lucas. Even the thought of his name stirred something inside her that she had long tried to suppress. It had been years since they last spoke. She had watched his life unfold from afar, through occasional social media posts and fleeting mentions from mutual friends. He seemed happy, happier than she could ever imagine him being with her. Maybe that was why she never sent the letter. Maybe deep down, she believed she wasn't meant to be part of that happiness. But still, the letter remained. Emma leaned against the window frame, her fingers tapping lightly against the wood. How different would her life be if she had just sent it? Would Lucas have read her words and felt the same? Or would he have turned away, leaving her to deal with the consequences of her vulnerability? Her heart ached with the weight of possibilities. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to picture his face, his voice, the way he used to make her laugh without even trying. There was a time when they had been inseparable, when their friendship had been the one thing that grounded her in the chaos of the world. But somewhere along the way, her feelings for him had deepened into something more, a longing that was both exhilarating and terrifying. And now, all that was left was this unfinished letter. Emma stepped back from the window and returned to the desk. Her fingers hovered over the page, the temptation to finish the sentence tugging at her once again. "I've loved you for longer than I can remember," but no matter how many times she tried, she couldn't bring herself to complete the thought. The fear was still there, stronger than ever. With a heavy sigh, she folded the letter, carefully placing it back in the drawer where it had stayed for so long. Maybe one day she would find the courage to finish it. Maybe one day she would tell Lucas the truth. But for now, the letter would remain a secret, just like her love for him. As Emma closed the drawer, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room. She glanced at the window once more before turning away, her heart still heavy with the words she couldn't bring herself to say. The smell of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air, blending with the faint hum of conversation around the small cafe. The sun outside was warm, painting the streets in soft amber light, but inside the cozy space, everything felt calm and familiar. It was here that Emma first met Lucas. She hadn't planned on spending much time at the cafe that day, just a quick stop for a cup of coffee before heading to the park. But as she stood in line, scrolling through her phone, she felt a slight nudge from behind, startling her. When she turned around, she found herself face to face with him. A man, tall, with unruly dark hair and warm, hazel eyes, looking apologetic as he smiled sheepishly. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to bump into you," he said, his voice soft and genuinely kind. Emma shook her head, a smile pulling at her lips despite the surprise. "No worries," she replied, brushing off the encounter. And that was it. Or at least, it should have been. But as she moved to the counter to place her order, she realized he was standing beside her again, still smiling, as though fate itself had nudged them together. "Great place, isn't it?" Lucas asked, glancing around the cafe as he waited for his turn. "I come here every weekend." Emma chuckled softly. "Yeah, I've been here a few times. It's got that perfect mix of peace and quiet, doesn't it?" He nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. It's like my little escape from the world." There was an ease about him, the way he spoke as though they had known each other for years, not minutes. Emma couldn't help but be drawn to that. They ordered their coffee and, before Emma knew it, they had taken seats at a small table by the window, exchanging stories about their lives. He talked about his job as a graphic designer, his love for travel, and the quirky little details that made him who he was. Emma found herself laughing more than she had in weeks, charmed by his quick wit and the warmth that radiated from him. The hours slipped by unnoticed. What was meant to be a brief stop turned into an afternoon of shared conversation, with the easy flow of words between them like a river, unforced and steady. At some point, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, Emma caught herself staring at him, his hands moving animatedly as he spoke, his eyes lighting up when he described his latest project. There was something about him that made her feel as though they were the only two people in the world at that moment. She didn't even notice the cafe slowly emptying around them. And just like that, she felt it. A pull. Something new, something that caught her off guard. She brushed it aside at first, telling herself it was just the pleasantness of a good conversation with a stranger. But deep down, a small voice told her that wasn't all it was. There was something else. Something about Lucas felt different. When they finally said goodbye that evening, exchanging numbers with the promise to meet again, Emma found herself replaying the afternoon in her mind. She didn't know it then, but that day was the beginning of something she would come to cherish. Their friendship blossomed quickly after that first meeting, fueled by long conversations, spontaneous coffee dates, and late-night texts. It wasn't long before Lucas became a fixture in her life, someone she relied on, someone who knew her in a way that no one else did. They talked about everything, from their childhood memories to their deepest fears, and through it all, Emma felt herself growing closer to him with every passing day. She hadn't meant to fall for him. But love, as it often does, sneaks up quietly, catching you off guard when you least expect it. It was on one of their regular coffee dates that Emma first realized just how much Lucas meant to her. He had been talking about his latest trip to the coast, describing the ocean waves and the endless stretch of sand with a childlike excitement in his voice. She had been listening, but at the same time, something inside her shifted, an understanding, a quiet certainty. She had fallen for him. Deeply. And yet, even in that moment, she said nothing. How could she? Their friendship was too important, too delicate to risk with a confession that might change everything. So she kept it inside, buried beneath the laughter and the shared moments, hoping that it would somehow disappear on its own. But it didn't. As the months passed, Emma's feelings only grew stronger, pulling her into a quiet agony she wasn't sure how to escape. She told herself it was enough to be close to him, to have his friendship. But late at night, when she lay awake thinking about him, the thought of never telling him how she felt gnawed at her heart. It was during one of those sleepless nights that she first thought of writing the letter. A confession of everything she had held inside for so long, a way to release the words she could never say out loud. She imagined the weight lifting from her chest as she finally put pen to paper, letting the truth spill out in ink. But the reality of sending the letter terrified her. And so, it remained an idea. A thought. A dream of what could be. And Lucas? He remained blissfully unaware, continuing to be the friend she adored, while Emma's secret stayed hidden just beneath the surface. Months passed, and what began as casual coffee dates between Emma and Lucas blossomed into something deeper, something unspoken but undeniably powerful. Their friendship had grown so strong, so comfortable, that Emma often found herself lost in the moments they shared, quietly wondering if Lucas felt it too, the subtle shift, the weight of something more. It was a Friday evening, the kind of cool, crisp night that always made Emma feel alive. She and Lucas had planned a simple evening together, dinner and a walk through the city. Nothing unusual. But that night, everything felt different. The air was charged, the silences between them lingering just a little longer than they used to. After dinner, they wandered through the park, the city's distant hum fading behind them. The lampposts cast a soft glow on the path, and Lucas walked close beside her, his arm brushing hers now and then, sending quiet sparks up her skin. Emma couldn't help but steal glances at him, his relaxed smile, and the way his hair caught the light. As they reached a small, quiet bench beneath a large oak tree, Lucas gestured to it. "Want to sit for a bit?" he asked. Emma nodded, taking a seat beside him, her heart beating just a little faster than normal. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching as the last bits of daylight slipped below the horizon, leaving the sky painted in shades of violet and deep blue. Then Lucas spoke, his voice soft but steady. "Do you ever wonder how we got here?" Emma glanced at him, confused by the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean, us. Our friendship. It feels like it's been years, but really, it's only been what? 6 months." She laughed quietly, nodding. "I know. It's strange, right? Like we've known each other forever." Lucas turned toward her, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the lamplight. "Yeah, that's exactly it. You're different, Emma. You make everything feel easy." Emma's breath caught in her throat. Her pulse quickened as she searched his face, trying to figure out what he was really saying, but Lucas didn't elaborate. Instead, he smiled, a soft, almost wistful smile, and turned his gaze back to the sky. Her mind raced. What did he mean by that? Was he trying to say something more? Was this the moment she had been waiting for? For months now, her feelings for Lucas had grown stronger, no matter how hard she tried to keep them in check. She had told herself that she was fine with being his friend, that it was enough just to be near him, but sitting here now, in the stillness of the night, she felt the weight of her unspoken emotions pressing against her chest. She wanted to say something, to tell him how she felt, but the words wouldn't come. What if she was wrong? What if Lucas didn't feel the same way and she ruined everything? Instead, she smiled, keeping her voice light. "You make things easy too, you know. I've never had a friend like you." The word friend felt bitter in her mouth, but it was safe. It was the boundary she had drawn, the line she had told herself she would never cross. Lucas leaned back on the bench, closing his eyes for a moment as if savoring the quiet. Emma studied his face in the soft light, tracing the familiar lines of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. She felt an overwhelming urge to reach out, to touch him, to close the distance that seemed so much smaller in moments like this. And then, without warning, Lucas spoke again. "I'm really glad I bumped into you that day. You know, at the cafe. It feels like everything's been better since then." Emma's heart skipped a beat, and she forced herself to respond, though her voice trembled slightly. "Me too." But Lucas wasn't done. He turned to her, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her stomach flip. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met," he said quietly. "If I hadn't walked into that cafe. It's funny how one little thing can change everything." The way he said it, the way his gaze held hers, made Emma's pulse race. She could feel the moment building between them, the invisible tension that had been simmering for months now finally coming to a head. Her mind screamed at her to say something, to tell him how she felt, but she was frozen, caught between the fear of losing what they had and the overwhelming desire to take the leap. Lucas shifted closer to her, his knee brushing hers. His voice was low, barely above a whisper. "Have you ever felt like maybe things happen for a reason?" Emma's heart was pounding in her chest now. She didn't trust herself to speak, so she just nodded, her breath catching in her throat. Lucas held her gaze for a long moment, the world around them fading away. It was just them, sitting beneath the stars, suspended in the quiet of the night. Emma could feel the unspoken words hanging in the air between them, so close she could almost reach out and touch them. But then, just as suddenly as the moment had come, Lucas broke the silence with a laugh, light and carefree. "I don't know," he said, shaking his head as if shaking off the weight of his own words. "Maybe I'm just being dramatic." The spell was broken. Emma forced a smile, but inside, her heart ached. She had been so close to telling him the truth. But just like that, the moment had passed, slipping through her fingers like sand. They sat in silence for a little while longer before Lucas finally stood, stretching his arms above his head. "We should probably head back, it's getting late." Emma nodded, her heart still heavy with everything she hadn't said. As they walked back through the park, side by side, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them that night. The line between friendship and something more had blurred, if only for a moment. And as much as she tried to push the thought away, Emma knew she couldn't keep her feelings hidden forever. A few weeks passed after that night in the park, and while everything between Emma and Lucas seemed the same on the surface, something had shifted beneath it all. The silences between them had grown a little heavier, the touches a little more deliberate. Emma could feel it every time they met, every time his hand brushed hers, every time his gaze lingered a second too long. But nothing was said. They continued their friendship as if nothing had changed, and yet everything felt different. It was on a rainy Saturday afternoon, as Emma sat curled up in her apartment, that her phone buzzed. A message from Lucas. She smiled instinctively, already feeling a warmth spread through her chest before she even opened it. "Lucas, hey, you home? I'm in the neighborhood. Thought I'd drop by with some coffee." Her heart raced. She wasn't sure why, but the idea of Lucas showing up, unplanned, stirred something inside her. Maybe it was the thought of being alone with him in her space, or maybe it was just her imagination running wild. Either way, she quickly typed back. "Emma, sure, I'm here. Bring the good stuff, though." His reply came back almost instantly. "Lucas, of course. Be there in 15. Emma glanced around her apartment, suddenly feeling self-conscious about the mess. She hurried to straighten things up, fluffing the cushions on the couch, tossing stray papers into drawers, and running a hand through her hair, hoping she didn't look as frazzled as she felt. By the time Lucas knocked on the door, Emma's heart was pounding again, though she couldn't understand why. He'd been over dozens of times before, and yet today felt different. She opened the door, and there he stood, grinning at her through the rain, 2 steaming cups of coffee in hand. "Brought your favorite," Lucas said, handing her one of the cups. Emma took it, their fingers brushing for a brief moment. She tried to ignore the electric sensation that coursed through her at the simple touch. "You're a lifesaver," she said with a smile, stepping aside to let him in. Lucas shook off his jacket and hung it on the coat rack by the door, glancing around her apartment with the ease of someone who had been there many times before. "Cozy," he said, his usual teasing tone in place. "Looks like you've been having a lazy day." She laughed softly, nodding. "Guilty. There's something about the rain that just makes me want to do absolutely nothing." They settled onto the couch, the rain pattering softly against the windows, creating a peaceful backdrop to their quiet afternoon. For a while, they talked casually, as they always did, about work, about life, about nothing in particular. But as the minutes ticked by, Emma could feel the same tension from that night in the park creeping back into the room. The conversation slowed, leaving a comfortable silence between them. Lucas leaned back against the couch, his arm draped lazily over the backrest, and for a moment, Emma considered sliding closer to him, letting her head rest on his shoulder, letting herself feel the warmth of him beside her. But she didn't. She stayed where she was, clutching her coffee like a lifeline. Out of nowhere, Lucas spoke, his voice softer than usual. "Hey, can I ask you something?" Emma's heart jumped in her chest. She set her cup down on the coffee table, trying to act casual as she turned to him. "Sure. What's up?" Lucas didn't look at her right away. Instead, he stared down at his hands, as if choosing his words carefully. "Do you ever wonder, what if? What if things had gone differently between us? What if we weren't just friends?" His words hit her like a tidal wave. For a moment, Emma was sure she had misheard him. Her mind raced, her pulse quickening as she tried to process what he was asking. Was he finally bringing up the thing they had both been avoiding? Was this his way of testing the waters? She didn't trust her voice, so she nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. Her heart was pounding so loudly in her chest that she was sure Lucas could hear it. Lucas finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers, and Emma saw something in his gaze that sent a jolt through her. Something vulnerable, something uncertain. "I've been thinking about it a lot lately," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "About us. And I don't know. I feel like maybe I've been holding back. Like maybe I haven't been completely honest." Emma's throat went dry. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Her mind raced, her emotions a chaotic swirl of hope, fear, and disbelief. Was this the moment? Was Lucas about to say the words she had longed to hear for so long? But even as the hope surged within her, a small voice in the back of her mind warned her to be careful. What if she was misinterpreting things? What if this was just Lucas being reflective, thinking out loud, without any real intention behind his words? She swallowed hard, her voice trembling when she finally spoke. "What do you mean, Lucas?" He shifted in his seat, leaning forward slightly, as if the weight of his words were pressing down on him. I think maybe I've been scared. Scared to ruin what we have. But sometimes I wonder if there's something more. If we're meant to be more." Emma's heart was in her throat now. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat, tangled up in the storm of emotions inside her. Before she could respond, Lucas let out a breath, his hand running through his hair as if frustrated with himself. "I don't know," he said, his voice lower now, almost resigned. "Maybe I'm overthinking things. Maybe I'm just scared of losing you, even as a friend." The air between them felt thick with tension, the unspoken words hanging in the silence. Emma could feel the weight of her own unsaid confession pressing down on her, the letter she had never sent looming large in her mind. This was her chance to tell him everything, to say the words she had kept hidden for so long. But fear gripped her, holding her back. What if it wasn't what Lucas really wanted? What if she misread the entire situation? What if telling him the truth ruined everything between them? Instead of speaking, Emma did what she always did. She smiled, a small, careful smile, and pushed the words back down. "Maybe we both overthink things sometimes," she said softly. Lucas looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a slow nod, he leaned back against the couch, the tension easing slightly. The moment had passed, just like it always did, leaving Emma with the familiar ache of things left unsaid. As they sat in the quiet of her apartment, the rain still falling softly outside, Emma couldn't help but wonder how many more chances they would have before the truth finally broke free. A few more weeks passed, and the tension between Emma and Lucas remained. It hung over every conversation, lingered in every touch, and Emma felt it gnawing at her more each day. She hadn't told him how she truly felt, hadn't taken the leap. Maybe she never would. It was a cold Sunday morning when everything shifted. Emma had spent the weekend busy with work, trying to distract herself from the confusing storm of emotions swirling around Lucas. She had pushed the thoughts of their conversation from her mind, convincing herself that their friendship was more important than anything else. But that morning, as she sat in her apartment sipping coffee, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She glanced at it, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Lucas's name flash on the screen. "Lucas, need to talk. Are you home?" Something about the message sent a chill through her. His tone was different, direct, almost urgent. Emma felt a knot form in her stomach. She hadn't seen Lucas in a few days, and the last time they spoke, things had felt tense. Now, she couldn't help but wonder what he wanted to talk about. "Emma, I'm here. What's going on?" His response was immediate. "Lucas, can I come over?" Emma stared at the screen for a moment, her anxiety rising. She quickly typed a reply, her fingers trembling slightly. "Emma, of course. Come by whenever." Within 20 minutes, there was a knock at her door. She hadn't bothered to tidy up this time. There hadn't been time to think about it. Her mind was already racing with 1,000 different possibilities, wondering what was on Lucas's mind. When she opened the door, she was greeted by the sight of him standing there, his hair disheveled from the wind, a serious look on his face. He didn't have his usual easy smile, the one that always made her feel at ease. Instead, his expression was tense, almost as if he were bracing himself for something. "Hey," Emma said softly, stepping aside to let him in. "You okay?" Lucas walked in without a word, shrugging off his jacket and tossing it on the chair by the door. He paced for a moment, running a hand through his hair, and Emma could feel her heart pounding in her chest. Something was wrong. This wasn't the Lucas she knew, at least, not the carefree, laid-back version of him she was used to. "Lucas," she prompted, her voice filled with concern. "What's going on? You're freaking me out a little." He stopped pacing, turning to face her, his expression conflicted. "Sorry," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't mean to just show up like this. Just what?" Emma asked, her nerves on edge. "You can talk to me. You know that." Lucas let out a deep breath, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of what he was carrying had finally caught up with him. "I wasn't going to say anything," he began, his voice low, almost hesitant. "But I can't keep doing this." Emma's heart skipped a beat, her stomach twisting in knots. What did he mean? What couldn't he keep doing? He took a step closer, his eyes locking with hers, and Emma could see the vulnerability there, the uncertainty she hadn't noticed before. "Emma," he said quietly, "I don't know how to say this without making things complicated. But I've been thinking about you. About us. And I can't stop." Her breath caught in her throat. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she had feared and hoped for all at once. She stood there, frozen, unsure of how to respond as Lucas continued, his words pouring out like a flood he could no longer hold back. "I don't know when it happened," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "But I can't stop thinking about you, Emma. It's driving me crazy. Every time we hang out, every time we talk, it's like I'm constantly fighting myself, telling myself I can't ruin this. That we're better off as friends. But I can't pretend anymore. I can't keep pretending like this isn't, like we aren't." Emma's heart was racing now, her mind spinning as she processed his words. He was finally saying it, the thing they had both been avoiding, the truth they had danced around for months. Her emotions surged inside her, a mixture of relief, fear, and overwhelming joy. But even as her heart soared, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered doubts. What if this changed everything? What if their friendship never recovered from this? What if they tried and it didn't work? "I know this is sudden," Lucas said, his eyes searching hers for any sign of how she felt. "And I get it if you don't feel the same. But I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. I had to tell you. I needed you to know." Emma stood there, her mouth dry, her pulse thundering in her ears. She had wanted this, hadn't she? For so long, she had waited for Lucas to say these words. But now that they were out in the open, now that he had finally confessed, she found herself overwhelmed by the weight of what it meant. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the tension thick in the air between them. The silence stretched, growing heavier with every passing second. Emma opened her mouth to say something, to tell Lucas how she felt, but the words wouldn't come. Her fears held her back, keeping her rooted in place, unable to move forward. Lucas's expression faltered, his shoulders slumping as if he had braced himself for rejection. He took a step back, the distance between them growing. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have." "No," Emma interrupted, her voice shaky but firm. She couldn't let him walk away, not now. Not when they were so close to everything finally coming together. "Lucas, wait." He stopped, his eyes wide, watching her carefully. Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself as she looked at him. "I've been wanting to tell you, too," she confessed, her voice trembling with emotion. "For months. I've been holding back because I was scared. Scared of losing you, scared of ruining what we have. But I can't keep pretending either." Lucas's eyes softened, a mix of relief and hope flickering in his gaze. He took a step closer again, closing the distance between them. "You mean that?" Emma nodded, her heart full as she looked into his eyes. "Yes. I don't know what this means or where we go from here, but I do know that I can't keep hiding how I feel." For the first time in what felt like forever, Lucas smiled, really smiled, that easy, warm smile that made her heart melt. Without another word, he reached out and pulled her into his arms, holding her close, his embrace both tender and full of everything they had been keeping hidden for so long. As Emma buried her face in his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. The truth was finally out. They had taken the leap, and whatever happened next, they would face it together. In the days that followed Lucas's confession, things between him and Emma shifted in ways neither of them had fully anticipated. They no longer danced around their feelings, no longer held back the words they had kept buried for so long. But with the truth finally out, the unspoken weight of their history, their shared years of friendship, lingered in the air. They spent more time together than ever before, laughing, talking, and basking in the newfound closeness that had always hovered just out of reach. But with every smile, every brush of Lucas's hand against hers, a shadow of uncertainty loomed. What now? What did this mean for them, for their future? It was late one evening when the past resurfaced. Emma sat curled up on her couch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders as she flipped through an old journal. She hadn't touched the journal in months, maybe even a year, but something had drawn her to it tonight. Maybe it was the nostalgia, or maybe it was the need to make sense of everything that had changed. As she flipped through the pages, her eyes landed on something she had nearly forgotten. Tucked between the pages of an entry from 2 years ago was an envelope, sealed, unmarked, but familiar. Her heart skipped a beat when she realized what it was. The letter she had never sent. She had written it one late night, back when her feelings for Lucas were still a confused mess in her heart, before she had fully understood what they meant. It had been meant as a confession, an outpouring of everything she had never said, everything she was too afraid to speak aloud. But she had never found the courage to give it to him. Instead, she had tucked it away, convincing herself that it was better left unsaid, that their friendship was too important to risk. Now, as she stared down at the envelope, the memories came flooding back, the nights spent wondering what might have happened if she had just given it to him, if she had been brave enough to let him in. Without thinking, she tore the envelope open, her heart pounding as she unfolded the letter. The words stared back at her, a painful reminder of the person she had been, the girl who had been too scared to take a chance. Dear Lucas, I don't know how to say this out loud, so I'm writing it here, where I feel safe, where I can be honest without the fear of your reaction. I don't know when it happened, but at some point, my feelings for you changed. You became more than just my best friend. You became someone I couldn't stop thinking about, someone I started to imagine my future with. But I've never told you, and I don't think I ever will. Because I'm scared of losing you, scared that if I tell you how I feel, everything between us will fall apart. So instead, I'll keep these feelings here, in this letter, where they can't hurt us, where they can't change what we have. But just know, Lucas, that I love you. In a way I don't know how to explain. In a way that scares me more than anything else. And even if I never tell you, even if you never know, I want you to understand how much you mean to me. How much you've always meant to me. I hope that's enough. Love. Emma. Emma's hands shook as she read the words, her heart aching with the memory of the pain she had carried for so long. The letter was raw, filled with a vulnerability she had tried to bury deep inside. And now, as she sat there with Lucas's confession still fresh in her mind, she couldn't help but wonder if this letter, the one she had never sent, was the key to understanding everything. Suddenly, the door to her apartment swung open, and there was Lucas, stepping inside with his usual ease, a warm smile on his face. "Hey, I hope you don't mind me dropping by again," he said, tossing his jacket onto the chair. "I brought dinner. Thought we could do a movie night." Emma quickly folded the letter, tucking it behind her on the couch, her heart racing. She wasn't ready for this conversation. Not yet. Not when everything between them was still so new, so fragile. But Lucas must have sensed something, because his smile faltered as he looked at her. "You okay? You look, I don't know, kind of upset." Emma forced a smile, shaking her head. "I'm fine," she said quickly. "Just thinking about stuff." Lucas raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. He walked over to the couch, sitting beside her, his hand brushing against hers. "What's going on, Em? You can tell me." Emma hesitated, her mind racing. Should she tell him about the letter? Should she let him see the part of her that had always been too afraid to be honest? Before she could stop herself, the words tumbled out. "I wrote you a letter," she blurted, her voice trembling. "A long time ago. When I first realized how I felt about you." Lucas blinked, surprised. "You did?" Emma nodded, reaching behind her to pull the letter from its hiding spot. She handed it to him, her heart in her throat. "I never sent it. I was too scared." Lucas stared at the letter for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he unfolded it, his eyes scanning the words she had written so long ago. The silence stretched between them, the tension thick in the air. Emma watched him, her nerves on edge, unsure of what he would say, unsure of how he would react. She felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't been before. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lucas set the letter down, his eyes meeting hers. "Emma," he said softly, "why didn't you give this to me? Why didn't you tell me?" Emma swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "Because I was scared. I didn't want to lose you." Lucas reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "You wouldn't have lost me," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I don't think anything could ever make me walk away from you." Emma felt a lump form in her throat, her emotions overwhelming her. I didn't know. I didn't want to risk it." Lucas smiled gently, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I get it. But you don't have to be scared anymore. We're here now. Together." For the first time in what felt like forever, Emma allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. That the fear, the doubt, the unspoken confessions no longer had to hold them back. As they sat there, hand in hand, Emma realized that the letter she had never sent no longer mattered. What mattered was the moment they were in now, the future they were finally brave enough to face together. After the conversation about the letter, Emma and Lucas found themselves navigating the delicate shift in their relationship. They had acknowledged their feelings, the years of hidden emotions now out in the open, but there was still a hesitancy between them, as if they were tiptoeing around the edges of something much bigger. It had been weeks since Lucas had read the letter, and in that time, they had settled into a routine: dinners together, movie nights, and quiet mornings spent lingering over coffee. But there was still a question hanging in the air, unspoken but ever-present. What comes next? One crisp autumn evening, Emma found herself walking through the park with Lucas by her side, the golden leaves crunching beneath their feet. The air was cool, but not uncomfortably so, and the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the horizon. The atmosphere felt charged with possibilities, and Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. They strolled in comfortable silence, their fingers intertwined, the warmth of Lucas's hand reassuring. Every once in a while, he would glance at her with that soft smile of his, the one that made her heart flutter in her chest. But tonight, there was something different in his expression, something deeper, more serious. Eventually, they reached a bench overlooking the small lake at the center of the park, and Lucas gently tugged Emma toward it. "Let's sit for a bit," he suggested, his voice quiet but filled with an underlying tension. Emma followed, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her as they sat down. She could feel the cool breeze brushing against her cheeks, the distant sound of children playing, the rustle of the leaves in the wind. But most of all, she felt Lucas beside her, his presence grounding her even as her mind raced with unspoken questions. They sat in silence for a few moments, the stillness between them stretching out. Then, Lucas took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the water in front of them. "I've been thinking," he said softly, his voice tinged with a nervous edge. "About us. About everything." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She could hear the uncertainty in his voice, but also the determination. "What about us?" she asked gently, her eyes searching his face. Lucas turned to look at her, his expression vulnerable but resolute. "I know we haven't really talked about it, but what we have, it's not just a casual thing for me. I'm all in, Emma. I want this to be real. I want us to be real." Emma felt her breath catch in her throat. She had been waiting for this conversation, dreading it and hoping for it all at once. The truth was, she felt the same. But the fear of what that meant, of how their lives might change, had kept her from voicing it aloud. "Lucas, she began, her voice faltering as she tried to find the right words. He squeezed her hand gently, his eyes filled with warmth and understanding. "You don't have to say anything right now," he said softly. "I just wanted you to know how I feel. I've been thinking about us for a long time, about what we could be. And I don't want to lose you again. I don't want to hold back anymore." Emma's chest tightened with emotion, her heart pounding in her ears. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the sincerity in his eyes, the love that had always been there, just waiting for her to see it. And in that moment, she realized that she couldn't hold back either. She didn't want to. "I'm all in too," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. "I want this, Lucas. I've always wanted this. I was just scared. Scared that we'd lose what we had if we tried to be something more." Lucas smiled, a slow, genuine smile that lit up his whole face. "I get that. I was scared too. But I think what we have is strong enough to survive anything. Don't you?" Emma nodded, a sense of calm washing over her. "Yeah," she whispered. "I do." For a moment, they sat there in the golden light of the setting sun, their hands still intertwined, the air around them thick with the promise of something new. It felt like they had crossed a threshold, stepped into a future that was suddenly brighter, more certain than ever before. But as much as the future excited her, Emma couldn't ignore the questions that still lingered in the back of her mind. "What do we do now?" she asked softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. Lucas chuckled, a light, carefree sound that made her smile. "Well, I was thinking we could start with dinner," he said, his tone teasing. "And then maybe we could talk about what comes next. About us. About what we want." Emma smiled, the weight of her doubts lifting just a little. "That sounds perfect." As they stood to leave the park, Lucas slipped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. They walked in comfortable silence, the future no longer a daunting, uncertain thing, but something they were ready to face together. Later that evening, after dinner and hours of conversation that felt like they were finally laying all their cards on the table, Lucas walked Emma home. As they stood outside her door, the city lights casting a soft glow around them, Emma felt a sense of peace settle over her. "Tonight was perfect," she said softly, looking up at him. Lucas grinned, his eyes twinkling with affection. "It's just the beginning, Em." Without another word, he leaned down and kissed her, a kiss that was full of all the promises they had made that evening, full of the love that had been building between them for years. And for the first time, Emma allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could be there forever. A few months had passed since that autumn night when Lucas and Emma had finally decided to face their feelings head-on. Their relationship had grown in ways Emma never thought possible, and though the transition from friends to something more had been smoother than she expected, there were moments of hesitation, moments when both of them seemed to pull back, still adjusting to their new reality. Tonight, they were at Lucas's apartment. The scent of homemade pasta filled the air, and the soft hum of jazz played in the background. Emma had always loved Lucas's place. It was warm, cozy, filled with books and little trinkets he'd picked up on his travels. But tonight, she felt a different kind of energy in the air, a nervous tension building between them that neither had yet addressed. After dinner, they moved to the couch, sipping glasses of wine as they talked about their day. But the easy flow of conversation that usually marked their time together felt slightly off tonight. Lucas had been quieter than usual, his eyes flickering toward her more often, as if he had something on his mind. Emma couldn't take the suspense any longer. Setting down her glass, she turned to him. "What's going on with you?" she asked, her tone light but laced with genuine curiosity. "You've been distant tonight." Lucas hesitated for a moment, running a hand through his hair as if he were trying to find the right words. Finally, he sighed and leaned back against the couch, his gaze meeting hers. "I've just been thinking," he admitted, "about where we are and where we're going." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "Okay, and?" He exhaled slowly, his brow furrowing. "I mean, I'm really happy, Em. I am. But I guess I'm just trying to figure out how we fit into each other's lives now. It's different being in a relationship, and I want to make sure we're on the same page." She studied his face for a moment, trying to gauge where this conversation was heading. "I'm happy too," she said softly. "But you're right, it is different. What exactly are you worried about?" Lucas looked down at his hands, his fingers tapping against the wine glass. "I guess I'm just wondering if we're ready for the next step. You know, making this more official." Emma blinked, caught off guard by his words. "Official? We've been seeing each other for months now, Lucas." "I'd say it's pretty official." He smiled slightly but shook his head. "I mean more than that. Like, I don't know, moving in together? Taking this relationship to the next level." The weight of his words settled between them, and Emma felt her chest tighten. It wasn't that she hadn't thought about it, moving in together, building a life with Lucas, but hearing him say it out loud made it all feel very real. And very fast. She paused, unsure of how to respond. "That's a big step." Lucas nodded, his expression serious. "I know. And I'm not saying we have to do it right now. I just wanted to bring it up because I've been thinking about it a lot. I want to be with you, Emma. Really be with you." The sincerity in his voice tugged at her heart, and yet there was a part of her that hesitated. They had spent so many years as friends, navigating the complexities of their relationship from that vantage point. Now, as they stood on the precipice of something deeper, she couldn't shake the fear that rushing things might ruin what they had built. "I want to be with you too," she said, her voice gentle but steady. "But I also think we need to be careful. I don't want to move too fast and risk losing what we've worked so hard to build." Lucas looked at her, his expression softening. "You're right. I don't want to push you into anything you're not ready for." Emma reached out, taking his hand in hers. "It's not that I'm not ready," she said, her thumb brushing over his knuckles. "It's just, we've waited so long to get here. I don't want to rush this. I want to enjoy it." Lucas's smile returned, warm and understanding. "I get that," he said. "We can take things as slow as you need. I just wanted you to know that I'm serious about us. About a future with you." Emma's heart swelled at his words, the last of her doubts melting away. "I know," she whispered. "And I'm serious too." For a while, they sat there in comfortable silence, the weight of the conversation easing as they leaned into each other. The tension that had been building earlier seemed to dissipate, replaced by a quiet sense of understanding. Eventually, Lucas turned to her, his eyes twinkling with that familiar playfulness. "So, how about a movie?" he suggested, reaching for the remote. Emma laughed. grateful for the lighter mood. Sure, as long as it's not another one of your terrible action movies. Lucas feigned a look of horror. Terrible? How dare you insult my impeccable taste in cinema? She giggled, leaning her head against his shoulder as he scrolled through the options. Fine. I'll give you one more chance to prove me wrong. As the movie began to play, Emma found herself relaxing into the moment, content to just be there with him. The conversation about moving forward, about the future, was still fresh in her mind, but for now, she was happy to let things be. They had time. They had each other. And that was enough. For now, at least. It had been a peaceful week for Emma and Lucas, the conversation about their future no longer hanging in the air like a weight. They were taking things slow, enjoying the quiet moments that came with finally being together, and allowing their relationship to unfold naturally. But as always, life had a way of surprising them when they least expected it. One chilly Saturday morning, Emma was sitting at the small cafe near her apartment, sipping on her favorite caramel latte and scrolling through her phone. The air outside was crisp, the leaves on the trees almost fully transformed into a sea of golds and reds. She was planning to meet Lucas later in the day for a walk through the park, but for now, she was savoring a bit of alone time. The bell above the cafe door jingled as it opened, and Emma barely glanced up, too focused on an article she was reading. But when she heard the familiar sound of her name being called, she froze. Emma? Is that you? The voice was unmistakable. She slowly looked up, her heart thudding in her chest, and there, standing in the doorway, was Jason, her ex-boyfriend. For a moment, she was too stunned to speak. Jason hadn't been a part of her life for years. Their breakup had been messy and painful, the kind that left scars even after time had passed. She hadn't thought about him in a long time, but now, seeing him in front of her, all the old emotions came rushing back. Jason, she finally managed, her voice tight. What are you doing here? He smiled that same easy smile she used to love, the one that always made him seem so confident, so sure of himself. I was in town for work and thought I'd grab a coffee. Didn't expect to run into you, though. Emma forced a smile, her mind racing. She hadn't prepared for this. How could she? She and Jason had ended things on such bad terms, and the last thing she wanted was to dredge up the past. Especially now, when things were finally going well with Lucas. Well, here I am, she said, trying to keep her tone light. It's been a while. Jason's eyes softened as he stepped closer. Yeah, it has. How have you been? Before Emma could answer, Jason pulled out a chair and sat across from her, his eyes searching her face as if he were trying to read her emotions. She felt a pang of discomfort. This wasn't how she wanted to spend her morning, catching up with her ex like they were old friends. I've been good, she said, keeping her response short. What about you? How's everything on your end? Jason shrugged, leaning back in his chair. Same old. Work's been keeping me busy, but you know how it is. I heard you were doing some writing now. That's great. Emma blinked, surprised. How did you hear that? Jason grinned. Social media, of course. Just because we haven't talked doesn't mean I haven't kept up with what you've been up to. There it was, the familiar charm that had drawn her to him in the first place. But now it felt hollow. She wasn't the same person she had been when they were together, and the thought of Jason watching her life from a distance made her uncomfortable. Right, she said, trying to steer the conversation away from her personal life. So, what brings you to this side of town? Jason's gaze flickered, and for a moment, he hesitated. Then, with a sigh, he leaned forward, his voice lowering. Actually, I came because I've been thinking about us. About what happened between us. Emma's heart sank. This was not a conversation she wanted to have. Not now. Not ever. Jason, that was a long time ago, she said firmly. We've both moved on. He shook his head, his expression serious. I know, but I never got the chance to apologize. Not properly, anyway. I hurt you, Emma. I know that. And I've regretted it every day since. Emma swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. This was not how she imagined her day going. She had buried the pain of their breakup a long time ago, but hearing him bring it up now, out of nowhere, was like ripping open an old wound. "You don't have to apologize," she said quietly. "What's done is done." Jason looked at her, his eyes filled with regret. "I know. But I've changed, Emma. I've had a lot of time to think about everything, and I realized I took you for granted. You deserved better." Emma felt a wave of emotion rise in her chest, but she forced it down. This wasn't the time to get emotional. She had moved on. She was with Lucas now, and that was all that mattered. "I appreciate that," she said carefully. "But I'm in a different place now. I'm happy." Jason's face fell slightly, but he nodded. "I'm glad to hear that. You deserve to be happy." There was an awkward silence between them, the kind that lingered when too much had been left unsaid for too long. Finally, Jason stood, pulling his jacket tighter around himself. "I won't keep you any longer," he said, his tone softer now. "But I'm glad we ran into each other. It was good seeing you, Emma." Emma nodded, offering him a small smile. "You too, Jason. Take care." As he turned to leave, she watched him go, a strange mixture of relief and sadness settling in her chest. She had once loved him deeply, fiercely, but that part of her life was over. And now, as she sat there, alone in the cafe, she realized just how much she had grown since then. Her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Lucas. "Can't wait for our walk later. Miss you." Emma smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. Whatever ghosts from her past had resurfaced today, they no longer had power over her. She had made her peace with what had happened with Jason, and now her future lay with Lucas. She took a deep breath, stood up from the table, and left the cafe, ready to meet Lucas and embrace whatever came next. The late afternoon sun streamed through the park, casting long shadows on the path as Emma and Lucas walked side by side. The air was filled with the rich, earthy scent of fallen leaves, and Emma felt a sense of peace envelop her, the stress of the day already fading into the background. After her unexpected encounter with Jason, she had felt a mix of emotions, nostalgia, relief, and a renewed appreciation for what she had with Lucas. She was grateful for the clarity it brought her, reaffirming that her past was just that, past. She was here now, and she was happy. "So, how was your day?" Lucas asked, glancing sideways at her with that easy smile that always made her heart flutter. Emma considered for a moment, debating whether to share her earlier encounter. But as they continued walking, she decided it was important to be open with him. "Actually, I ran into Jason this morning," she admitted. Lucas raised an eyebrow, his expression curious but careful. "Your ex?" "Yeah," she said, keeping her tone light despite the memories it stirred. "He was in town and stopped by the cafe. We talked for a bit." Lucas nodded, a hint of tension crossing his features. "How did that go?" Emma took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "It was surprising. He apologized for how things ended between us. Said he'd been thinking about it a lot." "What did you say?" Lucas's tone was measured, but she could sense his concern. "I told him it was in the past," she replied, meeting his gaze. "I've moved on, Lucas. I'm happy where I am." A slow smile spread across Lucas's face, and Emma felt a rush of warmth. "Good. I'm glad to hear that. You deserve to be happy." As they continued their walk, the conversation turned lighthearted, with Lucas teasing her about her coffee order and Emma playfully retaliating with quips about his questionable taste in movies. The laughter flowed easily between them, each shared moment building a deeper bond. Eventually, they found a bench overlooking the lake, where the water shimmered under the afternoon sun. They sat down, the peaceful sound of nature surrounding them, and Emma couldn't help but feel content. "Can I ask you something?" Lucas said after a moment, his tone shifting slightly serious again. "Of course," she replied, looking at him expectantly. He paused, clearly weighing his words. "What do you think about the future? I mean, not just about us, but what you want for yourself." Emma considered his question carefully. She had always been a planner, someone who liked to map out her goals and dreams. But in recent months, she had felt a shift, a desire to be more open to whatever life threw her way. I think I want to keep writing, she said finally. I've been working on some new stories, and it feels good to explore that side of me again. But I also want to make sure I'm not losing sight of everything else, you know. Lucas nodded, his expression encouraging. I get that. It's about balance. Exactly. And I want to experience life more, travel, try new things, and, of course, be with you, she added, reaching for his hand. He squeezed her fingers gently, his eyes warm with affection. I want that too. Whatever it takes to make sure we're both happy. As they sat there, Emma felt a swell of hope. She knew they still had hurdles to overcome, both individually and as a couple, but there was a strong foundation between them, one that had been built on trust and understanding. They were ready to face whatever came next together. Just then, a flock of ducks waddled by, quacking noisily as they approached the water. Emma laughed, her heart lightening even further at the sight. Look at them. They're so determined. Lucas chuckled, his laughter infectious. They're probably on a mission for food. We should join them, right? Ducks don't waste time, she joked, but then her expression turned serious again. Lucas, I know we've talked about taking things slow, but I want you to know that I'm excited about what's to come. I want us to build a life together. His eyes brightened at her words, and he leaned closer, his voice earnest. Me too, Emma. I want this to be the beginning of something amazing. In that moment, everything felt right. They sat close, sharing a comfortable silence, watching the ducks swim lazily in the lake, the sun beginning to set behind the trees. Emma felt a sense of belonging wash over her, a feeling that had eluded her for so long. As the sky turned shades of pink and orange, she turned to Lucas, her heart full. Here's to new beginnings, she said softly. To us, he replied, leaning in to kiss her softly. The world around them faded away as they shared that moment, a promise of all the possibilities waiting for them. They had faced the past and were ready to embrace the future together, step by step, hand in hand.